Lesson 34. We continue with the philosophy of the Kleshas according to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2, Sutra 9. Abhinivesha is the strong desire for life, which dominates even the learned or the wise. Abhinivesha is fear, but he describes it as desire for life. So it's the fear of death. That is the ultimate fear that people have. But fear in general is an instinct. And it is our strongest instinct. It is our instinct of survival. We are struck by fear in case of danger. And it will cause us either to fight in order to survive or to flee. It is clearly a very strong instinct, emotion, that most people have no control over. Pay attention, look around you, and you will see that people very easily panic. Something happens, often just a small thing, and people freak out. I see it happening all the time. And I can say I'm pretty panic resistant. I didn't realize that until I realized how other people act and react. What happens when you lose control is that you lose oversight, and it makes everything worse. We talked about this before, and I mentioned the statistical fact that when disasters happen, when fire breaks out in nightclubs, most people do not die by the fire. Most people die because they are trampled by other people panicking. People lose control. They don't know what they're doing anymore. They often run in the wrong direction. I gave you another example. When I was in a parking lot, a parking garage underground, and I saw somebody burgling a car, and the car alarm went off. And in a blind panic, he ran 3 circles around the car before he gained control and ran to the exit. So this is of huge implication. I've also seen somebody claiming to be very spiritual, being a Reiki master and a yoga master and what have you, and freaking out over a fly in the room and losing control. And then the person was in a shoulder stand, falling out of the shoulder stand, farting in the uncontrolled movement, and then being completely embarrassed and shocked. And look, a spiritual person, first of all, doesn't freak out over a fly. And when something embarrassing happens, like a fart or something, you make a joke about it. So that person, proud of all their spiritual achievements or alleged achievement, just proved themselves to be wrong. But as a real spiritual person, you will become panic resistant And it is not because you want to or because you choose to. You're just functioning in the crown chakra. And you see something happening and you immediately rationalize it. While other people react from Muladhara chakra, fear strikes them, they freak out. You stay calm. You overlook the situation and you say, it's nothing. And in case it is something, while other people run around like headless chicken, you quickly determine what you need to do in that situation of danger. You look around and say, where do I need to go? What do I need to do to avoid this danger? In the case of being in a building where something like fire breaks out or another form of disaster leading to people panicking, you will quickly determine where the exit is. And you will just calmly go there. And maybe even on your way help some other people to go there. Another thing that you will do, you become so conscious, is that when you enter into a situation, you anticipate the possibility of danger. So before something even has happened, you have already looked at what needs to be done in case danger does occur. You anticipate, you develop the power of anticipation, foresight. It's a very natural thing to do because you become conscious, because you become connected. You recognize situations that you get into as being harmless or dangerous. And often when you consider them to be dangerous in foresight, in anticipation, you will decide not to go there. Example, the disaster that happened in Itaewon. All of you probably know this little alley. How on earth is it possible that 150 people died there? How do even 150 people fit in there? There were 3 or 4 or 5 times more than 150 people. The other people survived, but 150 died. Later, there was an article in the Korea Herald or the Korea Times where people were interviewed who said, I was there and I saw what was going on and I took the subway to Hongdae. Those people had foresight. Those people anticipated, maybe subconsciously, intuitively, but they sensed the potential for danger and decided to go to another location in town to celebrate, Halloween, but in a place where there was less crowded. Patanjali here also does something very compassionate. He says, if you suffer from fear, if you do panic, don't feel bad about it, because even the learned and the wise are subject to this deeply ingrained instinct of survival. It's so strong, nobody can escape from it. The yogi or any other person with reasonable activity in the crown chakra will, however, like you do with everything else, the moment that you are struck with the instinct, with the emotion, you will rise above it and calmly determine what is going on and what needs to be done. And that is a huge asset in practical terms. Sutra 10. These, the subtle ones, can be reduced by resolving them backward into their origin. We talked about this last week also. The Kleshas start from ignorance, and you then, over time, you descend into ego, attachment, hatred, and end up in the final station of fear. And last week in another sutra, he kind of referred also to what he's saying here, that the way to deal with fear is to use anger. And with anger you go back, and then you deal with the anger, because anger in itself is a toxic emotion. You can use it in a practical way to get out of fear, but you should also not stay stuck in that emotion of fear. So you bring it back to attachment. And from attachment you bring it back to ego. Attachment, to get out of anger, you use compassion by telling yourself, I'm only human. This can happen to anybody. Fear, you solve by anger. Anger is not good, you solve with compassion. Attachment, you then solve with ego. You say to yourself, good job. I managed to control this, to take care of this. And you then reverse it back, not to ignorance, but that process has led to a new lesson in life. Insight, wisdom. Avidya becomes vidya. And this process will happen again and again with unknown aspects of life. And you become wiser and wiser as a result. That is where wisdom comes from. Wisdom comes not from a book. Wisdom is insight based on experience and contemplation. There are people who have read thousands of books, have degrees, diplomas, and what have you, and when you hear them speak, you wonder where the lack of common sense is coming from. And then there are people with no education to speak of who speak wisdom based on life experience. So degrees, study, reading is good. But to do something constructive with all that input, you need activity in the crown chakra so that you can develop your own insights. And that is where all the dots connect, all the pieces of the puzzle come together. Sutra 11, their active modifications are to be suppressed by meditation. So the previous sutra said the small ones can be dealt with by reversing them back to their origin, ignorance. Step by step. The big ones, the big kleshas, cannot be reversed back to their origin just like that, but meditation there does the work. I will read what I wrote there because that's my experience. For many years I've been walking around with my head full of questions and doubts. That was in my teenage and 20s. My heart knew what to do and where to go, but the head always threw a spanner in the works. Once that started, I could not see a solution and would feel really stuck. That's why I contacted Ajita at some point, and he gave me a proverbial kick in the butt, so to speak, a very simple way. That was the moment I understood the value of meditation. Only when I would sit down and meditate or practice asana in a very quiet and meditative way, quietness would come over me and peace would come into my heart. As a result of the head becoming quiet, I would fully connect with the heart and know that everything was all right. This gave such a wonderful sense of reassurance. I would never have succeeded in overcoming the troubles of my life without this gift. It also deeply convinced me that there is no coincidence in life, that everything happens when the time is right, when you are ready for it. It also taught me that all the misery was there for a purpose, not to wail in misery, but to learn a lesson and move on. That deep understanding in its turn teaches you patience and diligence. God helps only those who help themselves. It is almost like a religion or becoming religious, but straight from the heart, not like the dogmatic religions as we know them. Without the silence of meditation, I would never have had the insights and wisdom necessary to do what I had to do and to survive. What I found out to be the result of meditation is that there is always a solution, but it also made me understand that normal people are not able to see a solution because they are in the midst of all those disturbances that muddle their view, rendering them incapable of seeing the essence of things. Their mental pollution does not allow inspiration and insight to come to them. The value of meditation is much more practical than people can imagine. It is not about being an interesting person, involved in hip or fashionable pseudo-spirituality or new age stuff. Meditation exists to solve practical problems. It is absolutely necessary for everyone to meditate, and it would be ideal if every school had meditation in the program. Sutra 12. The reservoir of karmas, which are rooted in Kleshas, brings all kinds of experiences in the present and future lives. We are a collection of karma. Karma that we have gathered since we were born. But according to philosophy, we are also born with a backpack full of karma from previous lives. There are, of course, people who don't believe in reincarnation, previous lives, rebirth and what have you. That's fine. You can just limit it to the life that we are presently in. But an example of past karma already mentioned twice is me and my brother on the beach in southern France doing something that made people realize they must be Dutch, because they realized that is something that the Dutch battled for centuries. And it's not that my brother and I were born or grew up in that danger, because everything has already been built and rebuilt, and there hasn't been a flood. That's in your genes. Now, unconditioned people who are not going through the process that we go through, we call that the purification process. They are so full of pieces of karma, they can't see the trees for the forest, or the forest for the trees. You understand that expression, right? You can see it like this. I used in the handout the example of a house in the mountains. When you have a whole mountain range, and somewhere in that mountain range is a house, it's very hard to find. But the Netherlands is flat. It's famous for being flat, having no mountains. If you're there in the countryside, in the what we call polder, polder is land made out of water, basically. And there is a house there somewhere in the middle of the polder. From far away, it's very easy to see. It stands out. The polder with the one house is very easy to see because it stands out. That is the purified yogi. That is you with time, after cleaning up one karma after the other. That's a very natural process that is taking place as a result of your increasing consciousness. I use another analogy or metaphor, and I think I've used it in this class before, I'm not 100% sure, but it's about standing on a mountain looking out over a forest. And all you see is a sea of green. That's all you see. That is the unconditioned person that is full of karma. You cannot distinguish anything. And so there's nothing to work with. But when you meditate, like the previous sutra suggested, to deal with the real problems, meditation is the solution. You develop the ability to start weeding out the karma. And it is like as if you are going to clean up the forest. A forest consists out of many trees, but there are also smaller plants like shrubs and bushes, and there are weeds and moss and grass and what have you. So you start with the small ones. You start cleaning up the weeds and the grass on the forest floor. Still a sea of green when you look at it from a distance, but you start cleaning up. This is the purification process that takes place as a result of your increasing consciousness. Then you start cleaning up the bushes and the brush. So a little bit of clarity starts now to come. You start to see trees, tree trunks and what have you, but there are many different kinds of trees. So you start clearing out the trees. And in the end, there are only a couple of really big trees. The redwoods that you find in Canada and North America, the sequoias, those trees grow bigger than 100 meters. They're gigantic. And at the bottom, at the base, their trunk is just so huge, very impressive. Those you cannot clear. That is your biggest karma. That is your essence. In the end, the karma, the essence that you couldn't see in the beginning when you started your yoga and before you even started yoga or developing consciousness, after a while of cleaning up all the smaller brush and trees, those big trees, those sequoias, stand out and cannot be ignored anymore. And that is what you work with. All the rest you were able to get rid of, but those are your essence, and those are what you, for the rest of your life, basically have to deal with. When you purify yourself more and more, your samskaras, your impressions that you carry with you, become clearer and clearer. As a result, you become purer, but you also get more misery. That is called the diseases. One of the diseases of the disciple. I've referred to this from the beginning of the course by saying that when we become more sensitive and conscious, we also experience more misery, misery not only from ourselves, our past, but our memory, but also we develop a connection with other people, so we start also to be subjected to other people's suffering. And I mentioned that is one of the diseases of the disciple. Number one, it is very important that we become conscious of that, otherwise we become the victim of what is in fact a new quality, the quality of sensitivity and consciousness. And many beginning yoga practitioners, they have a temporary stage in which they become emotionally unstable because of this. I went through that, and everybody at some point will go through that. It is because of that that we learned pratyahara in lesson 28-29. That is our weapon to protect ourselves. We do not blunt ourselves or ignore the impressions that we now receive or see, but we have a rational way to deal with it so that we do not suffer from our new quality. Our quality is an asset if we can canalize it and put it to good use, but it can become a curse, a liability, if it is out of control and we start suffering from it. So increased sensitivity and consciousness has a tendency, especially in the beginning stages, to be a liability. The sooner we deal with that, using pratyahara, using our alertness, consciousness, the sooner it will start to work for us. The sooner it will become an asset as opposed to being a liability. Another aspect also here is that the purifying human being is doomed to atone for your sins. And that sounds very religious, but that is described in religious books, because spiritual people become aware of their sins. You have in the Bible the mentioning of the Judgment Day. And other holy books also mention the same kind of concept of Judgment Day. The people think that Judgment Day comes when you die. The day that you die, in the Bible, you end up in front of Peter, Saint Peter, and he will determine whether you will go to heaven or whether you will go to hell. If you have sinned in your life, you will go to hell. If you behaved well, then you will be allowed to go to heaven. Judgment Day. But Judgment Day does not come when you die. Judgment Day starts the day that you become conscious. That is where the atonement begins. That is where the suffering begins. And you're not supposed, as many religious people will make you believe, that you must suffer the suffering. That is not what Patanjali says. Patanjali says, learn something from it and try to do better. Use it as an incentive to change yourself and your life and burn karma, purify. Heaven and hell do not exist after you die, they exist here and now. And my observation shows me, and experience also from myself, my life, is that most people live in a condition that in a religious book is called hell. It's the condition in which we suffer. Heaven is sattva, peace. And it is clear that when we engage in behavior that violates the yamas and the niyamas, we invite a lot of disruption onto ourselves that causes restlessness, but it can lead to regret, guilt, all those kinds of negative emotions. That is what we consider to be hell. Heaven occurs when you reduce or eliminate behavior that violates the yamas and the niyamas, and as a result you are more in sattva. Sattva leads to activation of the crown chakra. In the crown chakra, when there is total sattva, that is what we call heaven or paradise. Questions? That was the last sutra for today. Next week we will continue. Okay, let's have a short break.